Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations. We exchange information. There's no therapy done on this podcast, and we provide a ton of resources. At any time, if you are triggered, we're going to have some information that I'm going to share with you in a few seconds. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. It's produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. I'm your host, your fire medic brother, your CEO of Penton Pending. I am LP. I got a very special guest that's back in the house. We're going to do a part 2 to our very favorite topic, stigmas, taboos, and stereotypes. I want to welcome my guest, Leah Abraham, in the house, in the building. She's back to give us some more information to continue our conversation that we had a couple months ago. And I'm just so delighted. Again, this is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. If you are triggered at any point during this podcast, because we come heavy and hard, we don't sugarcoat shit, we don't shuffle and jive and none of that stuff. Like, it's real talk. Like, you know, if you got kids, you might want to put them in another room or something like that, because it's about to go down. If you're triggered at any point, I want you to call 911. Because we know that that's where everything starts. That's where the documentation process starts. That's where you can start getting all the resources aligned and even more. If you don't have an emergency, but you still need help, in the show notes, so because this is going to be recorded audio and video, and we're streaming out everywhere you get your podcasts, including Audible. We have the domestic violence, the sexual assault, the trafficking hotlines available, and their websites listed. We also have the new 911 number for suicide issues. That's 988. That became nationwide July 16th. And I've been talking about this for months. And now I've been seeing everybody posting it like, oh my God, I can't believe they had this. And I'm like, I've been talking about this for the last 4 months. Where you guys been? Anyway, that's just another story. So if you have a substance abuse issue, alcohol or drugs, we have 3 numbers listed for you also. So if you are a supporter of someone who has one of those issues, we have Al-Anon. If you have alcoholism, we have Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have a drug issue, we have Narcotics Anonymous. So we really strive to cover all the bases. Leah Abraham, she is our resident childhood trauma expert, among other things that she does. Leah, I want to welcome you back. We're going to continue with this part 2 of stigmas, taboos, and stereotypes of childhood sex trauma. How are you doing, my beloved friend?
Oh, LP, I'm happy to be back. Thank you for having me for round 2. It was an awesome conversation the first time around, but there's always so much to say. So I'm glad we're gonna do this again. I'm doing good today. I'm happy to be in spaces where we're having these types of conversations where support is the main focus.
Yep.
All those resources that you give at the beginning and the end and that you have in your show notes are really important. We want people to know that they're supported through this. And
right.
Yeah, so I'm feeling good today, Larry. Thank you.
I want to add one more point of reference to the listeners and the watchers of this show. We cover missing person cases on this podcast, and that's people that are, and these are primarily melanated men, women, and children. Now, some of the shows that we do for missing persons, the whole episode is going to be about missing persons, like the case that I covered this past Thursday with our guest Theta Person, whose son was Christian Ferguson, and her case was on court TV, and it was the case of Missouri versus Ferguson. It was a nationally televised case. It was a week long from June 27th through July 1st. And in that case, his biological dad was the offender, and he was convicted of first-degree murder. Now, this case has been 19 years coming. And so that whole episode was about that missing person case, because to this day, nobody has found Christian Ferguson's body. And he was 9 years old. He was a special needs kid. So If you haven't checked out that interview, please, please, please check out that interview. It is a phenomenal story. Theta Person is a phenomenal advocate for missing persons. And today's story that we're going to cover at the end of this interview is the missing person case of ZAELA Walker. ZAELA Walker. And we'll talk about that at the end. Leah, you have a trauma drama room in Clubhouse. And that room this past week, you had a very interesting conversation with all of us talking about childhood sex trauma in relationship to STDs. And I want to jump right into that because that was such a dynamic, bit of information based on a book that you have access to. And before we do that, I want you to just talk about yourself a little bit. We're going to give you a shameless plug at the end, but I want to give you one at the beginning because you're such a phenomenal person. The mic is yours. Tell us about yourself. Just give us a refresher.
Thank you so much, LP. So Leah Abraham, I am a childhood trauma expert. I work with adults who are ready to begin healing their childhood trauma. I also work with them to see their addictions with new perspective, because where there is trauma, there's always a need to escape it. So there's always addiction as well. So changing the narrative around how we feel in terms of the addictions that we find ourselves in. And that's really my passion, is trying to send out the message that when we choose to heal, it can be a simplified process. It's not a simple thing to do. It takes a lot of work to heal because we're going back to those dark places. But the process, if you understand what healing looks like and why it's important, then it's a simplified process. So that's really the message that I want to put out, that there's so much pain on the planet, especially through sexual abuse. That's what I focus on primarily. And we all deserve healing. We need healing on this planet. So that's the work that I do. What I'm passionate about is making sure that people are able to choose healing and take the steps necessary to heal and to bring more joy into their life, to release a lot of the pain that we've stored in our bodies for so long. So that is the concept behind Trauma Drama Room. In that space, we're always speaking about childhood trauma specific to sexual abuse trauma. And then each week we have a different subtopic. So this past week, the subtopic was speaking about sexual abuse and sexually transmitted diseases and how they tie together. So that's a little bit about me.
I got chill bumps literally right now. Like, I don't know if you can see them or whatever, but I'm telling you, I'm just reflecting in my head in that room, that whole conversation, because I just remember distinctly when you first mentioned the book and you were talking about the correlation between the two. I was like, okay, I really want to hear this perspective. And it was an 11-minute read that you have. So if you want to read longer than that, that's fine. You got the mic, or you can go back into doing it like you did before. But I want to give you the microphone and I want you to basically give it to us like you gave it to us that day.
All right, LP. Yeah, so what I read at the beginning of the room, that was something that I wrote out. That's my personal experience with STDs, and I wrote it from the perspective of the relationship that I have with my parents. My father is my perpetrator, and so I wrote it from that perspective. I gave the first part of the story was how I felt in that moment during college when my parents had to come down and help me deal with something that was happening in my body. And then the second half of that story, I wrote it from the perspective that I have now, after I see clearly what happened to me in childhood and the type of environment that I was raised in. and how that all correlated together. So this book that you're referring to, that I often call the good book, is a book that's written by Louise L. Hay. And she wrote this book. It's called You Can Heal Your Life. But in this book, she has a compilation of her very first works, which were You Can Heal Your Body. And what that is a list of many ailments. I say many because there's not everything listed in here, but there's so many ailments and diseases within the human body. And what Louise Hay was able to do, based off of her work with her clients and her research and her purpose and passion, was put together this list of thought patterns behind these manifested diseases within the body. So everything starts as a thought pattern in the mind, and then it manifests outwardly to or inwardly in the body. And so she talks about, these different diseases being tied to these specific thought patterns that we have running in our mind. And then she gives you a counter thought pattern, a new affirmation thought pattern to counter that negative one. Okay. So what I read in the room was what she has listed for venereal disease. And I'll read it to you now. So the probable cause, the thought pattern that's running through people's minds that experience sexually transmitted disease in the body, this is what she states, that it's sexual guilt, it's a need for punishment, a belief that the genitals are sinful or dirty, and it's abusing another. So for me, those were all true. Those were core beliefs that I carried in my subconscious mind since childhood because of the abuse that I endured. But unknowingly, these are core beliefs that we carry in the subconscious, and most of the time we're unaware of them. But reading it out and being able to make that connection was really eye-opening for me. Because if you think about it, there are some people who will contract a venereal disease, and then there are some people doing the same actions that don't. Right. And so it's really about what our core beliefs are. And if we're believing that we deserve to be punished, and that our genitals are sinful or they're dirty, then it's very probable that our body will manifest this venereal disease, these sexually transmitted diseases. So I want to also read the new thought pattern for those of you that are listening, because if you do recognize that these may be some of your core beliefs that you're operating from, or if you've had sexually transmitted diseases in the past, it's very likely that it's tied to your belief around your sexuality. Yeah. So the new thought pattern is, I lovingly and joyously accept my sexuality and its expression. I accept only thoughts that support me and make me feel good. So that's, I'm going to read the one for herpes as well. I shared that in the room, and I think it's important to read that one as well, because it's just very powerful. If you really open yourself up to these different thoughts and you recognize how they live probably within you, it's incredible. So the one for herpes is mass belief in sexual guilt and the need for punishment, public shame, belief in a punishing God, and rejection of the genitals. And then the new thought pattern for that one is, my concept of God supports me. I am normal and natural. I rejoice in my own body and in my own sexuality. I am wonderful. So those are, thank you for letting me share that, LP, because to me, it's very, very important to get to the root cause and to connect to our current core belief system. It's really important to make that connection and to see that clearly, because it's from that space that we can begin to reconstruct those core belief systems. We can get to the root of our traumas and address it and begin to process and heal it, essentially. So thank you for letting me share that.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about these root causes, and let's get into some of this reconstruction.
Yeah. So when we know that we have trauma in childhood specific to sexual abuse trauma, when we know, it gives us that bit of advantage, because if there is sexual abuse in childhood, we for sure have these beliefs that we are flawed, that that we're not worthy, that this vessel, this body is to be used by other people, that it's not ours. We don't have clear boundaries. We don't know what it is to have boundaries around our personal space. So if you know that you have sexual abuse in childhood, then you can likely link those core beliefs already. But there are many people that, because in childhood, our body works with us to keep us safe, to allow us to survive into adulthood. So when we experience things like that, our brain literally shuts down parts of itself to protect us, so that we don't remember those things, so that we're not constantly living with that experience in our present moment. So there are many people that I work with and that I engage with that they don't clearly remember things that happened to them in childhood. And so that's when I say getting to the root of things, that's what we do, what we talk about. So getting to the root of things begins by looking at what has grown from that root. So what has grown? What does your current adult life look like? Are things working in your life? What is how are you progressing in your career? What do your personal relationships look like? What do your friendships look like? What does your level of self-love look like? Do you have these self-sabotaging behaviors going on? What's your relationship like with your children? There's all of these things that we can begin to look at. So it's what's grown from the root. We're looking at what's out here, and we can sort of begin to identify, well, I keep getting in these really bad relationships. I have this pattern of choosing people that abuse me, or, so we can start looking from the surface. But then if we see the pattern, I keep getting into these relationships where people abuse me. Okay, let's go down deeper to the root. Where did you learn that was okay? Why is that part of your core belief system, that I get into relationships with people who abuse me? So then we start going back and thinking, where did I first see that? Where did I first get that message? Where did I first create that core belief? And most often it is because you saw your parents in that type of relationship, an abusive relationship. So then we go back and we begin to revisit those experiences that we had in childhood and going deeper. And with healing, it's always about going deeper and uncovering and opening more layers to ourselves. So that's what I mean when I talk about the root. We look at what has grown from it, we identify the patterns within it, and then we track them back to where we first created that belief, or experienced that particular trauma. And the thing I want to say about that too is that when people are ready to heal, when they make the choice to heal, what we need comes up for us. So our subconscious is never going to give us too much, and it's always going to give us little pieces at a time to process. These little pieces it'll put in front of us, and we'll see that. We'll be able to process that. And then we'll move forward to the next piece. We'll go a little deeper. We'll uncover another layer. So it's a process. It's a process. But when you understand the process, it brings a lot of clarity to it, and it brings hope to know that if we go through that process, we will get to that other side of healing. We'll be able to create more joy in our life. We'll be able to create more space within ourselves for good to come in. So that's what I mean by the root.
How do we reconstruct a person who's traumatized, especially you add on that layer of STDs with the trauma? How do we help reconstruct that person to become whole again?
So Larry, the first part of that is understanding who we are on our soul level. So in my 5-step healing process, which I believe we touched on last conversation, the first step is alignment. So learning what it is for us as an individual to be in alignment in our body, in our mind, and our spirit. So when I work with clients, that's the very first thing that we go to, because we were born in alignment.
Right.
Who we are at the essence is our true authentic self. So we are that. So it's about figuring out, coming back to that part of ourselves and understanding when we are aligned in mind, body, and spirit in this present moment. This is what it feels like for me. This is what it's like when I'm in alignment. So the first step to this healing, this restructuring, is knowing what that alignment is for us. Because once we have a clear picture of what that looks like for us, we can easily identify when we're out of alignment. We can easily identify when we're out of alignment. And when we do identify that we're out of alignment, then we take the steps to bring ourselves back in. And what those steps look like are, again, identifying the pattern, getting back to the root, and then allowing for this body to process that stored energy of the unprocessed experiences from childhood. So that's how we sort of begin to restructure this, because if we recognize that in alignment, I'm fulfilled, I love myself, I'm capable of doing the work at my job that's going to get me that promotion. We know all of this stuff to be true for ourselves. So when we find that we're out of alignment, when we find ourselves in addiction, perhaps, then we can ask ourselves, well, what is it? Why am I here? What was it that triggered me into this space? And so that may be that your boss asked you to do something and you weren't able to meet the time limit on it. And so that's a trigger for you, because it reminds you that you're not good enough because you can't do things right, or whatever, that core belief that was instilled in you from childhood is. So then when you recognize that it's not your boss that's giving you that belief, it's something that already lives within you. And then so it's finding the root of that, and then seeing, I remember, when my dad told me that, when he was beating my ass and he told me that. So then you can identify, well, that is not truth for me. That is not truth for me. And then so you can either process what comes up from remembering that, from making that connection. And sometimes that looks like crying it out, or it looks like screaming, or whatever way your body can process that for you. But after you allow the release of that, and you tell yourself what is true, I'm capable of learning new things. I'm capable of meeting goals that I set, whatever it is for you. That restructures that belief. It removes the belief that, you can't do anything right, and it replaces it with, I can. If I work hard, I can do whatever I set my mind to. So that's an example of us being out of alignment and then bringing ourselves back in. So I give those tools, and I'm going to just quickly talk about those 5 steps one more time, so that you have them here, and our listeners have them. So the first step is alignment. What it is for you to be in alignment in mind, body, and spirit in the present moment. What does that feel like for you? And what does it feel like when you're out of alignment? So that's the first step, identifying alignment. The second step is self-love. Self-love. And I'll tell you, that is the hardest step for people, LP, because That's the ingredient that's missing, that we have never been introduced to. We didn't see our parents loving themselves. They didn't teach us how to love themselves. They taught us the opposite.
Mhm.
So bringing self-love in is a very difficult step, but it's necessary. It's so necessary, because when we start going into the trauma, when we start allowing those things to surface, all those negative core beliefs are activated, and they're reminding us, you're not good enough. You're not worthy. You're dumb. Like, whatever they are. So we need that self-love, that foundation of self-love, to combat what's going to come up when we move into step 3, which is dealing with the trauma. So before we go to step 3, I want to say about self-love that there are different levels of it. The first level is acknowledging. So acknowledging us, acknowledging our inner child, acknowledging our addiction, acknowledging our trauma, acknowledging the things that we don't like to look at. So
Okay.
just saying, I see you. Just saying, I see you is a level of self-love. It's the first level. And then from there, we go into acceptance. I see you and I accept you. And then from there, we have different levels and depth of self-love. But that's how it begins, simply by acknowledging and accepting, and then going
Did,
from there.
did you say releasing our denial was part of that also? Is that part of step
So
2?
that's part of step 3.
Oh, step 3. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. That's part of step
Step
3.
3.
So in step 3, we're talking about our trauma. And so that means first releasing denial that we've built up around that trauma.
Okay.
Because so I've talked about this in a lot of my Clubhouse rooms. It's like our denial, I talk about building castle walls of denial. So if you think about it, when we are in childhood, we receive these bricks of denial from our parents. No, this is what you're saying is not true. Here's a brick. This is the person that I am. I'm a good church going father. This is my particular experience. Okay, so this denial block, and they give you these blocks. So our parents build the first layers of that wall for us by giving us those blocks. And then as we get older, we create our own blocks of denial. No, I'm just being crazy. My dad's not, he could never do that. I'm being crazy. Block of denial. So we build these castle walls of denial around us to protect us. And it's a false sense of safety having this huge wall around us. But what that does, LP, is it keeps us from the world. So it keeps us protected behind these walls so that nothing can come in, but nothing can go out. And we can't, if you think of a castle, you think of like those little tiny windows. So we're like seeing out those little tiny windows, but we can't actually like experience this world when we're behind those walls. So the first thing we got to do is break down those walls and allow ourselves to see all of that trauma clearly, to see that the things that happen in that first 7 years of life when our core belief system is being structured, to see those things clearly. Like, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, my dad's been in AA for so many years. And I think to myself, and if they're my client, I ask them, okay, well, what about prior to that? Because when I was 12, my dad went into AA. Okay, all the time before that, think about that. Those first 7 years of our life is where we are creating that core belief system. So it's important to break down those walls of denial and see shit clearly.
That's right.
So that's when we can see all the bad, but we can also see out to the horizon all the good. So that's the importance of releasing our denial around this stuff. And then it's about getting to the root, getting to what I call the break in spirit, where our spirit was broken and we learned to go outside of ourselves for safety and comfort rather than stay in that alignment space. We learned that this alignment space is not, it's not okay. I have to look outside of me for safety and comfort. And that's what I call the break in spirit when that happens. And so identifying that, our deepest trauma that broke our spirit is what I like to try to identify with my clients.
I
And
want
then
you to
so
hold. I want you to hold right there.
hold that thought, okay?
Hold that thought before we get to the last two.
Okay.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast being brought to you by Anchor. We are produced by Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. I'm your host, LP. I have a special guest back for round two, Leah Abraham. She's a childhood trauma expert. You know, Leah, these last two, when I look at them, I'm like, man, I got to ask you before you go on. Because you're very intentional like I am. When you created this 5-step healing process, did you put these in order according to importance, or like what was your mindset when you created these particular points of this process? Because I'm sitting there and I'm like, if I were to do this just with the first three that you named, alignment, self-love, and releasing our denial, in my head, I think I would have put self-love first. Because you said it's the hardest, but it's the most necessary. And then I would have put the alignment and then releasing the denial.
Yes.
That's just me. That's just my brain. So I want to know just from those first three, but I don't want you to answer it right now because I want you to list the other two and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So
ADD
step
kicked in. I'm
4.
sorry.
No, I love it. I love it because that's a very good question. And I want to give that answer because it's important the way that the steps are put into place. So I'm glad that you asked that question. So we'll go to step 4 and 5 and then I'll cover that. So step 4 is our addictions. So looking at our addictions clearly. So when I talk about addiction, it's any pattern that we engage in that's outside of ourselves. So we know what alignment is because we've gone through step 1 where we create our alignment and our unalignment image. So when we are engaging in patterns that are out of our alignment, that's what I refer to as an addiction because it literally can be anything. People pleasing is an addiction. Exercise is an addiction. Collecting things can be an addiction. Hoarder type situations.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just going to say, yeah.
So, yes. So there, any pattern that is outside of our alignment can become an addiction, can be a potential addiction pattern. So we talk about looking at our addictions clearly. So when we are triggered, when there's pain in our present moment, we learned early in childhood, get away from that, find safety. So we've done that all our lives. Like, oh, something's coming up in the present moment that I cannot deal with. So I'm going to move into an addiction and now I'm okay. And so we all have those. But sometimes it's really hard for us to admit the way that we cope with our pain. So being able to see those clearly and identify them for ourselves is really important because the whole part about this 5-step healing process is gaining clarity and seeing with clear vision. Because for most of it, we've suppressed these things in the dark. We've only showed this part to the world. So this healing process is really about integrating all parts of ourselves. So seeing our addictions and not hating ourselves for using those addictions, but rather seeing the reason why, seeing and understanding why we go to those addictions, because the pain that our body is trying to process is it's too much without proper support or without the knowledge of how to move through and process what's coming up. So to see our addictions clearly is very important. And then the 5th step is having the proper tools to move forward. so that we've done all this work in these steps, and now we have proper tools to take with us as we move forward on this healing journey. Because like I said, there's always going to be more layers to us that are opening up, more things revealed. So it's important that we have tools in our tool belt, so that when something comes up, we know, okay, I can call this person, or I know this book that I can read through, this book that I can read through that's really going to help bring me back into alignment. Or so we build tools that are helpful for our journey. So those are the 5 steps. And so the reason why I set them up the way that I did, because like you said, yeah, self-love is most important. And why is that not first? But the reason why it's not first is because it's the hardest one, LP. If I told people, all right, we're going to heal, let's love ourselves first, I would lose everybody. Because
Really?
it's so hard to bring in something that's so foreign to us, and something that feels so foreign to our current core beliefs. Because our current core beliefs, they don't tell us that we deserve love. They tell us the opposite, that you don't deserve stuff, that you're not good enough, like you're to be used, or whatever those core beliefs are, they're not loving. If we are coming from a foundation of trauma, then those core belief systems are not loving. So to ask people to bring in self-love right off the bat, it's hard for us to comprehend how to do that. So we start with alignment first, because alignment is our natural state. So at the core of who we are, we all know alignment. We all know alignment. We were born into alignment. That's the essence of who we are. So getting that understanding first is really key. Because in that alignment, we go through and we talk about what is the body. The body is made up of the brain, the heart, the gut. That's the body, this physical body and every organ in it. Then we identify what is spirit. And spirit is whatever you believe your higher power to be. Spirit is whatever you believe that gives this body life. So what breathes your body, what beats your heart, that's spirit. And then we talk about the mind. What is the mind? And this one is, where it kind of gets tricky, but I love this part. The mind is the soul in human form, because the soul is the essence of who we are. It contains all the knowledge and wisdom of the universe. It contains all the knowledge and wisdom of who we are at our essence. So past lives, future lives, across time and space, that's what the soul is. But in order for the soul to learn new lessons, it has to enter into a human experience. So when it comes into the human experience, it becomes the human mind, which is something that can be conditioned, which is something that can learn, and it's subject to this human experience. So when we talk about, are you aligned in the present moment? Well, your physical body it's always aligned here in the present moment. If you're breathing and your heart's beating, then you know that spirit is with you. So what is it that moves out of the present moment? It's the mind. The mind can live in the past. The mind can live in the future. So it's about bringing them center and understanding the 3 parts and what they are for you. So that's why it's key to understand your alignment first. Because if you get that alignment piece, if you get how powerful you are when you're in alignment, it opens the door to that love to come in. It opens the door for what is natural to us in that space of alignment. Love is natural to us in that space of alignment. So that's why it's step 2 instead of step 1.
That makes sense now that you say it, because I was sitting there, like, when I was looking at the 5 steps, I'm like, I think I would have switched a couple of these around. but only the ones that I mentioned, because 4 and 5 I think are just perfect where they are. But in my head, I'm just like, I think I would have put self love first, because you're talking about acknowledgement, you're talking about acceptance. And then the way you explain it, I'm like, mind blown. That's it. I want to jump
Thank you.
to what we're talking about: stigmas, taboos, and stereotypes, because that's our theme with childhood sex trauma. EMDR.
Mm.
For those that don't know, EMDR is a modality that's used specifically for people that have experienced traumas. And so we're not going to get into a whole lot of that. What I will ask you about is, when we're talking about modalities like EMDR, because I like the way that it's set up with the eye movement,
Mhm.
different things like that, and you're focusing on different things as you're retelling a story, or retelling a trauma, or retelling an event. For you, being a practitioner in terms of having clients, I like the metaphysical part that you bring to your clients when you're talking about the mind, the body, the spirit, having everything in alignment. The way that you just explain it, I'm like, she's a metaphysician.
Mm.
And because you're a metaphysician, I like highlighting other metaphysicians on this podcast, because there's no one size fits all. Everybody doesn't need a pill. Medication is important, but everybody don't need it. Everybody's not going to go and sit on a couch for 45 minutes doing a Q&A session. You know, that might work for some people. We know now a lot of times that doesn't work, especially if you're really traumatized. That's where cognitive behavior therapy and EMDR, and now you have these non-traditional modalities, NLP and the EFT tapping,
Yeah.
breath work. You know,
Yeah.
Erin and I did a breath work session when I did her interview. I've done an EFT tapping session on the
Mm.
interview with my friend Danya Varghese, when we were talking about gun violence and how that played out with her in a domestic violence situation years and years ago. I talked with Geraldine,
Mm.
and I talked with Val, and we talked about some of these different modalities. I got a podcast coming out soon where a lady, she deals with tarot cards and crystals.
Mm.
We did a whole breakdown of how that all plays into the work that she does with people who have been victimized by domestic violence, by sexual trauma, people that have been trafficked, because she sees clients that have experienced all three of those. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. The stigmas, the taboos, and the stereotypes that you see when it is in regard to STDs. Let's talk about that real quick. What are some of the things that you have experienced with clients that have shared with you? You know, not only did I get traumatized, now I got this long standing venereal disease that I got
Mm.
to deal with, or just the fact that it might have been something that they took some medication and they got cured for, but it's still planting in their head. So, can you
Mhm.
talk about that?
Yeah. I first want to say, LP, that you're exactly right. Step 5 of the healing process is tools. And
Mhm.
those are very unique to each individual
Right,
based on their trauma, based on their addictions, based on their alignment.
right,
So we're all so unique in each of those areas. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there is no one size fits all. It's about what works for you, what is going to benefit you and support you as you move forward. And then I also wanted to mention the EMDR. I love that so much, because what it's doing is it's pausing, it's creating a pause in a pathway within the brain that gives us just enough of a pause to create a new pathway. And that's the beauty of it, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rewire. When I say, reconstructing the core belief system, I talk about it, and I always say here because it's like our foundation, but really it's in the neuro pathways in our brain. And so those types of modalities, the tapping, the EMDR, what it does is it just gives a pause so that we interrupt a current neural pathway. We experience a trigger from the outside, and that neural pathway goes, and that may lead us to addiction or to fight or whatever it is. But if we can use one of these modalities and pause it, it allows us to redirect that. So that's restructuring the core belief system. And that's why those are so powerful and really important to explore all these different modalities, because you don't know which one is going to work for you. But there's so many out there, and so many wonderful ones. And the people that practice and give these out to others, that's their passion. Right. So it's really important to try all these different things and find what works for you. Very important. Now, as far as the taboo and all of that, the stigma around sexually transmitted diseases. So, I talk about a topic that, first of all, not many people talk about: sexual abuse trauma. Right. But then we go even deeper and we talk about these type of things. We talked about sexual abuse and abortion 2 weeks prior, and this one, sexual abuse and STDs. Like, when I talk about self-love, acknowledging parts of ourselves, this is one of those parts of ourselves. Like, many of us are like, I will never tell anyone that I have an STD because I don't want them to think I'm gross or dirty, or the taboos, the stigmas around that. And so we just bury that down. We just put it away, we bury it down, and we never look at it again, and we never tell anybody about it. But the thing is, it's a piece of us. It's a piece of us. And if we don't acknowledge and accept that piece of us, we're not going to be our whole self. We're not going to be complete to move forward with our complete whole self and take these steps forward. We're going to be leaving parts of ourself behind, and that's going to hold us back because those pieces of us are still scattered back there. And so that's, it's incredible, the numbers, like how many people live with herpes or contract venereal diseases. And the numbers are so high. So it's like, if the numbers are so high, but we're all being quiet about it, nothing's going to change. And it's exactly the same with talking about sexual abuse. The numbers are so high, but nobody's talking about it. So how is anything going to change if we're not, bringing it to the surface to look at it, if we're not shining the light on these things? So I think, STDs was, a lot of people mentioned that when they saw the topic, they were kind of like nervous to go into the room and all of that. But the beauty is,
when
you
when
were,
you said that, I stood up. I was like,
let's do it.
let's do it. Like, why didn't I think of that before? I was like, oh my God. Because I knew we had our interview coming up again. I was like, man,
that's what we're going to talk
about. Because I'm telling you, I've been waiting on that, and I was just trying to figure out how I was going to approach it and who the guest was going to be, because I didn't want it to just be me talking or whatever, because I come from St. Louis, and let me tell you something. St. Louis, unfortunately, is known for a number of things negative. One is known as the murder capital to the U.S., and sometimes it's number one, sometimes it's number three, or whatever, based on the ratio per capita.
Right.
The second thing that is known for being number one is in STDs. And it's been number one for STDs for decades.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know this about me. Years ago, back in between 94 and 97, and I wasn't even in EMS. I was working for a neighborhood organization, and they had health clinics in the St. Louis area. Myself and a number of other people that worked at the job I worked at, we got certified by the Red Cross as HIV and AIDS educators. And we had two certifications. One was just as an HIV/AIDS educator, and the second one was an African American HIV and AIDS educator. And so what we would do is we'd go around to the neighborhood clinics and the neighborhood organizations and just anywhere, and we would teach people about HIV and AIDS. You know, good, bad, ugly, dispelling myths, the stigmas, the stereotypes, and taboos. That's where that came from because we
Mm-hmm.
talk a lot about that. And I just remember how uncomfortable it was. And this was before the word triggering came out and all this stuff or whatever in relationship to traumas. I remember having conversations with people about these things all the time, especially when it was in relationship to children and STDs, because that tends to turn the conversation in a whole nother direction. Now you're talking about criminal stuff. Now you're talking about
Pedophiles.
mandatory reporting. Now you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about pedophilia. Now, you know what I'm saying? So now you're talking about incest and molestation and rape and all of
Mm-hmm.
these different things. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
wants to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Now we know that has hurt and killed so many people,
Yeah.
and we got to do something about this. So when you brought that up, I was like, oh my God, you know what? Your flowers are just, I'm just going to lay them out like on Coming to America when they would throw all the rose petals out, when the king would walk or
I
whatever.
love the visual.
That's what I was doing. I was just throwing out the rose petals. I'm like, come on. you know,
Thank you, LP.
but seriously, we got to have these discussions
Yes, we
with
do.
solution-based plans of action because we're intentional, right? It ain't
That's
just
right.
about dialogue. So when you
That's
said
right.
that, I'm like, we're going to talk about that. And I want you to just say one thing about STDs in children in terms
Yeah.
of the reporting.
So,
Talk about that.
yes. Larry, first of all, I want to thank you for the person that you are because you're a unique individual who runs into the fire, who runs into the fire. So like these type of conversations, it's like you running into the fire. And I appreciate that because we need those type of heroes to help in these situations that nobody wants to run into the fire, but that's what we got to do. You know, okay, so we as children we internalize everything. You know, this traumatic thing happened to me and this adult treated me in this way, and we don't have the emotional intelligence to understand, oh, they must be traumatized themselves and they're acting from their traumas and this has nothing to do with me. We don't have the capacity to do that as children. The only thing we can do is it must be me. It must be me. So we internalize everything. It's the same with STDs. Like as adults, we because we already have that core belief that something's flawed with us, that it's our fault. So you don't know how many people think that, oh, it's my fault because I was being promiscuous or because and we make these stories that make us at fault. And when I read those you know, the connection between the thoughts in the mind and what's happening in the body, I hope that's freeing to people because when those type of things happen to us in childhood, an adult violates us sexually. An adult awakens our sexuality before we have the emotional intelligence to process something like that. It creates these patterns within us, and when we see the correlation, it's like no wonder. It's like no wonder
That's right.
we contracted these diseases because we believe that the genitals are sinful and dirty, and we believe in public shame, and we believe in all of these things that cultivate this environment for these viruses to thrive. So I hope that's helpful for you to understand that we know as adults that what happened to us was not right. It wasn't our fault. But it's the same with STDs. What happened to us was not right. It's not our fault because there's deeper issues going on there. There's deeper issues going on there. And in terms of in children, like that was something that was shared, you know, that was something that was shared, that oftentimes in adulthood we go into the doctor's office and you know, we find that we have these viruses living in the body, and the doctor tells us, you know, this could stem back from years ago. And then it reminds us that years ago we were a child who was molested by a parent or a cousin, or and so that's how we contracted the virus. And so it's like it's like trauma on top of trauma, you know, these layers of trauma, and it just becomes so heavy. It just becomes so heavy. So talking about it, looking at it, creating these safe spaces where we can have discussions about it are so important, because it removes that heavy weight off of us, and it gives us a clearer understanding of what's going on. Yeah, the STDs in children, it makes me like, it's almost like I don't like talking about it, because it's so fucking wrong, you know? It's so it's so foreign to the soul. It's so foreign to the soul. And I often say that about sexual abuse in general. It's so foreign to the soul. And that's why it's so difficult for us to like comprehend how the numbers are so high, like how it's so prevalent, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense. But the truth is, this is the world we're living in. Look at the statistics. Look at all the people that you speak to. Look at all the people I speak to. Like, the truth is, it's here. And the only way to change it is to begin speaking about it and shining the light on it, so that everybody sees it for what it is. And that's how we move forward in effective change. So
LP loves all the kids.
Yeah. The kids need love. The kids need love.
This is difficult for me, because I love the kids.
Yeah.
And not only do I love the kids, being a licensed clinician, being a paramedic, it makes me want to holler, like Marvin Gaye said, because I wrote down a bill of not rights.
A bill of not rights. I like that.
And I want to tell you what they are.
Yeah.
Because when I'm talking to kids and when I'm talking to adults who have been victimized with these traumas, I say, I'm going to give you a bill of not rights. You got a right to not be tortured, not to be raped, not to be molested, not to be shamed, not to be judged, not to be guilted, not to be pained, not to be injured, not to be violated, not to be abused, not to be impregnated, not to be infected, not to be hurt. And we can always do an amendment and add more to an addendum. I should say, not amendment, an addendum. We can always add to it.
Yeah, that's
What
powerful.
do you think about that?
I think it's powerful. And we also need to do the Bill of Rights. You deserve to love yourself. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to be listened to.
I want us to come up with that. We're going to come up with both. I want you to either add to what I said and for the not, and then we're going to collaborate together on a bill of on the flip side. So just hold off on that, because we're going to come up with that. Just hold off on that. I know.
Good.
Yeah, just hold off on that. Here's what I want to do, because again, we're intentional and we talk about plans of action. And again, this is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We're streaming everywhere that you get your favorite podcast. We're brought to you by Anchor, produced by Pendependent Consulting Solutions LLC. I want you, Leah Abraham, to give us 3 plans of actions when it comes to dealing with childhood sexual trauma and STDs. What do we do when we are made aware of that?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is support. Support is so important as we begin this healing journey. So get yourself a group of people that support you. Come join us in Clubhouse or find us on Instagram, but begin building a connection of support for yourself. Whether that is you get into therapy and you have a regular therapist, whether that's you come into Clubhouse rooms and you join the community, the safe community there, but get support, find support, because when these things start coming up, when we tell our subconscious mind, I'm ready to heal, and the subconscious mind allows these things to begin surfacing, we need support. We need support. So I would say get yourself some support. That's number one. Number two is know that you can heal. Know that you, all that, like when you look in the mirror, that what you see, that's enough to heal everything that you've ever been through. So that's so important for people to understand that they are their greatest healer. There's guidance from the outside. That's number one. Find your support, find your guidance. But it's you reconnecting to your inner healer. That's where the work is going to happen. It's inside of you. We're designed by nature, we're designed to heal from the inside out. You get a cut and your body heals it from the inside out. You have a virus, you get the flu, the body heals it from the inside out. You have trauma that came to you from the outside, the body heals it from the inside out. So that's number two, is know that you are strong enough and you have everything you need to be your own greatest healer. That's two. And then three, the last piece that I'll give is to remember that when we start doing this healing work and the things that come up, it's hard, it's heavy, but it is not the trauma. We have already been through the trauma as children. So when we consciously choose to go back through with our awareness, it's a different journey.
Yeah.
And it can be scary, but there's a strength in it because it's not the trauma anymore. We've already survived the trauma when we were kids, when we were children. So to go back through now as adults, choosing to go back through now as an adults, we have the strength to do that. We can do that. We're powerful enough to do that. So those are the three things that I would advise people. Find support. Know that you are your greatest healer. And know that whatever comes up, you are strong enough to handle it because you already did when you were a kid. So that's what I'll leave you with. The belief in yourself.
I'm going to add to that.
Yeah.
As a mandated reporter, I am telling you, you don't have to be a mandated reporter like I am because I have a license to practice medicine, because I'm certified as a medic. If you're just a parent, a caregiver, if you are any clinician, if you happen to be a mental health professional, whether you're a coach, an advocate, all the way to a social worker, therapist, all the way up to a PhD level psychiatrist, you have an obligation. You can be a teacher, you can be a nurse. Any mandated reporters, you absolutely 100% unequivocally have a responsibility by law to report child sex abuse. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. You can notify your supervisor that they're doing it. They can't make you not do it. Company policy has nothing to do with the law.
Mm-hmm.
You have to report those issues immediately once you know about them. There is no plausible deniability. That don't play. That don't count. That don't work. It ain't gonna cut. It ain't gonna cut. I'm telling y'all right now, because there's too many people, and mandated reporters have gotten a lot better at this, at reporting these things. But there's still a lot of that's going unreported.
Mm.
Something's wrong with that.
I want to speak to that, LP,
Yes.
because so when I talk about this healing, it's our responsibility to heal from the inside out. As a parent, people always ask me, what's the best thing we can do for our children? And I always respond the same. The best thing we can do for everybody in our life, for the world, is to heal ourselves. Because
Yes.
a lot of the reasons why people don't report is because they themselves haven't connected to their own trauma. So it's about the seeing clearly that I talked about. If we haven't seen our own shit clearly, then we're not going to be able to see that trauma clearly either. Our lines are blurred. We don't know if that's a violation or not, because we haven't addressed it within ourselves first. Like, I speak to that often about in school systems. There's so many teachers dealing with their own trauma that we expect teachers to be the advocate for children.
Right.
But when those people, they're just people like us, when their trauma is triggered by something that they're seeing happen with a child in their classroom, we can't expect them to stand up in the way that we want them to for those children, because they haven't dealt with their own stuff. So they can't see it clearly for what it is, or they're too afraid to say something, because if they recognize that as trauma, then they have to recognize what they went through as children as trauma. And some people are, they're too scared to do that. But so it always comes back to self. We want to help the next generation. We want to help our own children. We want to help the people that are in our environment, in our community. Then it starts by healing yourself, by connecting to your own traumas and seeing yourself clearly and processing through that. So then you can show up in the way that you're supposed to for your community. So I just wanted to put that in there, because it's very important.
It is. It's extremely important. I don't play when it comes to this stuff.
No, you don't.
I'm telling you, if you want to lose me, there you go. That's one way. And so, because who's going to protect these babies?
Actually, they won't lose you. They'll just see a different side of you, LP.
I'm glad you said that.
You won't walk out of their life. You'll walk into that fire, and you'll save the people in that fire that need saving. So they'll just see a different side of you.
Leah, you know what? We got to continue doing more to help, and we got to start having more of these discussions, because again, I don't give a damn if you're uncomfortable. I care if it's triggering to you, because I'm conscientious of how that's going to
Mental
play out
stability.
with you.
Yeah.
I speak from a position of passion with compassion. And that's the difference from a lot of other people. And as someone who's a licensed first responder, my job in my head for my company is I want to start talking with other first responders and bringing this awareness and this education and having in-services, which are just classes for them, because we get the calls all the time, but we don't get the training.
Yeah.
Nobody taught me about metaphysics. I learned this shit on my own. I told you before, I had one class in 14 years from when I worked at the fire department just on trafficking. How many red flags did I miss? Never had a class on domestic violence, never had a class on sexually based offenses. But we get calls like that all the
All the
time.
time.
All the time. That's got to stop. And you know what is happening? A lot of my fellow first responders are starting to internalize these traumas.
Mm.
How does that manifest in them? I'll tell you how. They're starting to commit suicides.
Mm.
They're starting to commit more acts of domestic violence. they start the. I mean, we already had problems with substance abuse. That shit is just going through the roof now. And the more these traumas that we are dealing with when we get called out on the 911 or 988 with this new number that's out for suicides. I got flesh and blood here. I'm not a cyborg. I'm not a one cell amoeba. If I get a call for a 911 and it may just come out as a unknown EMS call, and I get there and it's this kid standing there, like fidgeting and stuff or whatever, and they're crying, and I'm like, "Hi, what's going on?" And I find out, from their teacher that they're in pain because they got these genital warts, or they got gonorrhea or something like that. I got to go home and tell Mrs. LP after she tells me how her day is, and when she asks me how my day is, I had a 5-year-old kid that had genital warts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what do I do with that shit? Because I love the kids.
It's so
Am I going to start
triggering.
hitting the bottle? Am I going to start hitting the pipe? Am I going to start hitting Mrs. LP? I'm not. I'm just saying,
Right. How do you deal with taking all that in?
What am I going to do with myself? Am I going to take something and hurt myself? Right. I am a living.
How do you regulate your own nervous system after being exposed to something like that? And that goes back again, LP. It's your firefighter friends. What they need is resources and support on how to bring their own nervous system back to that state of calm. So it's not always in that hypervigilant state. And that's done on the personal level. Right. Only we can regulate our own system and bring it back to that resting state. Only we can. So those are the tools that we need to give to the people in your line of work. Those tools of how do I regulate my system? How do I bring my mind back to this present moment? Because in this present moment, that's not happening. But when I allow my mind to think about the things I saw today or to dwell on that, it pulls us out of the present moment, and it leaves us to, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? Move into addiction, do this. But when we bring our mind back into our present moment, everything is safe here. I am safe in this present moment. And we may feel like we're like abandoning the experiences that we witnessed that day, but it's not about that. It's about strengthening ourselves so that we're in a position to help when we need to. And that's by aligning ourselves in the present moment, like bringing our mind's focused attention to where we are in the safety of this present moment, and not allowing it to live there with all of that, because that happened and we don't want to ignore it. But where are we right now? We're safe in this present moment. And that's how we regulate our system. So then we can be strong enough to handle the next situation that comes up. So we're not dysregulated when we're going into that next situation. So yeah, there's so many layers to this, so many layers. Like I really do believe that it's like this, it's on a global scale. It's this earth plane has such imbalance of energy right now. There's such an imbalance of energy right now regarding human sexuality. Right. And so it's that big. And that's why there's so many different facets of it. And it can make us crazy thinking about, how do we fix this? But how do we fix it? We bring ourselves into alignment, because when we're aligned, that's how we show up the strongest way. That's how we make the next right choices. That's how we decide what we're going to do to combat this issue. Like, from that space of alignment, it's so powerful. So it can get overwhelming, but if we simplify it to bringing ourselves to that regulated state of alignment, that's where it's most powerful.
You gave me a brilliant idea for part 3.
All right, LP.
We're gonna do a
I
part.
love it.
This might be just a on. You know what? I already got it. This is gonna be an ongoing series with us.
I
Stigma,
like it.
stereotypes, and taboos. Childhood sex trauma. You
I
know
love
what
it.
part 3 is going to be because you said the word that popped up in my head, global.
Mm.
The next show that we're going to do, we're going to go global. We're going to talk about
Okay.
childhood sex trauma with arranged marriages, with women who are given what do they call it? Where like when men get the um, circumcisions, female
Oh,
circumcision.
yeah.
We're
There's
going to talk
so
about
much
that.
crazy shit going on.
Yeah, so we're going to go
Yeah.
global on part 3. We're going to talk about female circumcisions,
Okay.
these arranged marriages from a global perspective, because we don't really have that here in the States. But
Right.
that
But
shit
it's
is
still
still
very
fucking going
prevalent.
on. It's still
Hmm.
fucking going on. And I'm telling you, we're going to really, really get into that on part 3. So,
Sounds good, LP.
so September, we got a lot of time between now and then to get our research done. I might bring in someone who deals with that also
Okay.
internationally.
Yeah.
I
Wonderful.
think I want to find somebody to talk about that, and the 3 of us are going to have a nice powwow about that.
Sounds good, LP.
So I'll work on that.
I'm
But
looking
yeah,
forward to it, my friend.
yeah. How can people get in touch with you? How can they reach you? I'm going to put your information up because your interview is going to come out next month, the part
Okay.
1.
Awesome.
But how can people get in touch with you because you're just a phenomenal person? I know that on Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in Clubhouse, you have the Trauma Drama Room.
Yes.
Every Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Hmm. Yes.
Trauma Drama is the room, and we talk about childhood sex traumas, and we
Great.
talk about other things related to those topics. How else can people get in touch with
So I love that you brought up Clubhouse because the beauty of Clubhouse is that you can join the conversation right then when it's happening. Like if you have a question, come up and we will have a dialogue. So that's like the best way to make connection, immediate connection. I'm on Instagram. I'm on other social platforms, but most active on Instagram. That's the one that I check most often. So Instagram and Clubhouse are the two that I'm able to give my focus to with the time that I have. So please find me on Instagram, Clubhouse, but I do have all my content linked to my Facebook. I'm not active on there, but if you're on Facebook and you prefer that platform, I have all my Instagram content linked, so it does go there as well. So you can find resources and information on my Facebook. And everywhere, I'm Leah Abraham 1111.
you?
So
Okay.
find me on Clubhouse, preferably because we can engage there one on
Okay.
one. But DMs on Instagram
Yeah.
is probably
Okay.
best.
All right. Leah Abraham, quadruple 11.
Yes. Oh,
Leah, I can't wait.
quadruple one,
My mind
double
is,
11.
yeah, double 11. My mind went somewhere else because I was writing stuff down. So
That's
thank you.
all good.
I can't wait for part 3 because that's
That's going to
that's
be
going to be
good. Yeah.
so important because again, globally, not here in the U.S., but globally, we know that these things that are happening to children, especially girls with this female circumcision, this fucking arranged marriages stuff with these
Mhm.
grown ass men.
Oh my God. It's
Yeah.
so crazy, right? Like, that's why
Like,
we just
see,
need to bring clarity around it. Start speaking about it. Because when you're raised in that environment, it's like normal. But when you're out of it, you see and you're just like, what is happening? So, yeah,
only
that's going to
here,
be a good.
folks, only here in the Trigger Warning Talk
That's right.
podcast where you're going to get this type of content. And I'm telling you, Google it. Go on, do a search on Podcast World. Go to Podcast Land. I want people to email me triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. I want any link, any podcast, anything related to that topic about childhood traumas, especially sexual traumas in relationship to female circumcision and arranged marriages that you've heard on a podcast. I want you to email me those podcasts, those links, all of that stuff, because I want to know about that. I want to learn more about that. I want to talk to those individuals if I can. I want to highlight how traumatic that stuff is happening, because again, we don't see it happening here, but we know what's going on.
Mhm.
And I just want to thank you so much, Leah. I
It's my
really
pleasure.
honestly want to thank you so much. Again, we got a lot of work to do with my sister, and we're gonna do it. And we're doing it just like what you always say in your room. You gotta open up. Here's the forum. Here's the platform.
Mm.
Don't be afraid. Be
Right.
aware. I always say in my show with live in awareness, don't live in fear. We
Yes.
got your contact information. I'm gonna start sending people your way and like, hey, you know what? She's safe. She's trustworthy. She's honest. She has a heart of platinum.
Mm.
She's gonna make sure you get the resources that you need. That's the Leah Abraham that I know and love. Always,
Thank
every day, and twice on Sunday. Leah, I want to thank you so much. We're going to switch over to our missing person case.
you.
And
Mhm.
I want you to stay in this room for this one.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
just I'm gonna bring it up on the screen because we only got a few more minutes. So
Go
I want
for
to
it.
bring it up on the screen here and let me share it with you. So for those that are watching this when it comes out, it's going to be on Spotify and it'll be on our YouTube channel, which is Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. This is a story, and again, when we do missing persons cases, 99% of them are about melanated men, women, and children because we want to bring the same energy and the same media coverage to those that we see are not getting in the media. This story is about ZAELA Walker. This source comes from basictrendy.com, and I also got it from Mrs. LP, who is our resident true crime expert and missing persons expert. ZAELA Walker, and I'm just going to read the story, and I have the link to this story in the show notes here. She is from Las Vegas, Nevada. She's been missing since August 22nd of 2018. I'm just going to read the story because it's a short story. ZAELA was noticed in North Las Vegas, Nevada on August 22nd, 2018. She lived with her mom, Lakia Walker, and maternal grandmother Carla Richardson in the 4600 block of Mission Cantina Avenue at the time of her disappearance. Oh, excuse me. Let me put it back over there. Richardson reported Lakia, ZAELA, and ZAELA's dad, Ricky Beasley, missing on August 25th. By then, Richardson hadn't noticed ZAELA in nearly 2 weeks. Lakia had left ZAELA with Beasley on August 15 while she went on a job interview, and Beasley rejected returning the child later. Lakia called 911 to attempt to get ZAELA back and asked Beasley in text messages to return ZAELA, but her daughter was not returned to her. Beasley then said he'd just give ZAELA back if Lakia paid him 13 stacks. For those that don't know, stacks is 1,000. So $13,000. And Lakia promised to raise the cash. During that duration, Lakia told her mom Beasley had taken ZAELA to California to visit a relative. Richardson last saw her daughter when she left in a rush on August 22nd, saying, quote, "I'll be right back," end quote. According to Beasley's mom, late on August 21st, she heard a noisy thud coming from his bedroom that woke her up. She ran into the hallway and saw Beasley holding ZAELA, who was screaming. Beasley said he'd gotten furious and thrown a cot against the wall after ZAELA wet herself. He took the child into the bathroom to clean her off. The following day, ZAELA and her parents vanished. They just vanished. Photos of Beasley and Lakia are posted with this case overview. The couple went on an unannounced trip, leaving behind their cell phones, Lakia's wallet, and her car. During the trip up and down the state of California and then east across the country, passing through Mexico, Texas, Illinois, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Lakia later stated that they napped in the car at the highway rest stops and never stopped in one place for long. By September 17th, the pair had run out of cash, so they came back to North Vegas to get Lakia's ID and credit cards. Lakia met with one of her cousins there, but dropped out of sight again after her cousin inquired about ZAELA. Then they wandered across the border into Tijuana, Mexico, and spent 2 days there before going back to Cali. San Diego PD interviewed Lakia and Beasley at that time and inquired about the missing person report, but they told they were in no threat and that ZAELA was with Beasley's relatives. On November 17, Lakia and Beasley were detained in Houston, Texas, where police ran their names at a traffic stop and learned that they and their daughter had been reported missing. ZAELA wasn't with them at the time, and both her mom and dad said they hadn't noticed her in many months. Lake initially said ZAELA was living in Beasley or with Beasley's relatives. Lakia was released after 48 hours, but Beasley was booked for ownership of a stolen vehicle. He was driving his mom's car, which he had taken without her authorization. Beasley and Lakia returned to North LV after getting out of prison in Texas, and they were detained by police there in December. Lakia was released, but Beasley was caught again on the stolen vehicle charge. He was there after jail on charges of first-degree child abuse / neglect and abduction in ZAELA's disappearance. The police questioned Lakia many times and she failed a polygraph. She claimed ZAELA was with numerous other people, including Beasley's ex-girlfriend, his brother, and his mom. The data shows that she gave, quote, the data she gave, quote, led detectives to think that ZAELA was not alive, end quote. Beasley's story to the police altered many times as well. At one point, he said ZAELA was with Lakia, and at another time said she was with his mom. In a phone convo with Beasley while he was in prison, Lakia said, quote, "You always said nobody, no crime," end quote. A check of the couple's cell phone, which they left behind in North LV, exhibited Beasley had performed Google searches on August 21st about how to stop seizures in kids, including whether marijuana would help. He went to a marijuana dispensary that day and bought some. Investigators were able to verify that no one in ZAELA's mom's or dad's family ever had supervision of her after her disappearance in August, and that her parents never reached out to anyone about her. Investigators think ZAELA underwent a traumatic injury at the time of her disappearance in Paris as a result, and that her parents disposed of her corpse and then went on the run. Lakia had asked to be with ZAELA after Beasley took her in mid-August and declined to return her, but after August 23rd, she unexpectedly stopped exhibiting any interest in her daughter's whereabouts or well-being. She didn't even attempt to call or text ZAELA on her child's third birthday or send her a card or present. Although Beasley's mom stated she generally kept her car clean, Lakia told police that while she and Beasley were traveling around the country after ZAELA's disappearance, there was a horrible smell coming from the car's trunk, quote, like rotten meat, end quote. She and Beasley attempted to get rid of the smell by vacuuming the trunk and cleaning it with a lemon-scented ammonia. Police stated the smell Lakia describes is compatible with decaying human remains. We call it decomposition. In March of 2019, Beasley, who was still in prison on other charges, was charged in the killing of his daughter's disappearance, charged with killing in his daughter's disappearance, and Lakia was arrested on the same penalties. The couple is awaiting trial for the killing, so they are presumed innocent. I want to make that clear because they haven't been adjudicated all the way. So they are innocent until proven guilty. I got to say that just for legal purposes. Okay, so again, the couple is awaiting trial for the killing. Authorities do not know the location of ZAELA's corpse, but foul play is presumed in her case due to the situations involved. If you have any information about this case, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, please contact the North Las Vegas Police Department at 702-633-9111. Again, if you have any information, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, about ZAELA and her whereabouts, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, please contact the North Las Vegas Police Department at 702-633-9111. Or you can contact the Charlie Project at thecharlieproject.org. Leah, what do you think about this case?
You know, what I think about is in my heart, I think about her soul is already in safety.
Yes.
And I think about those two people and the others involved have created a hell for themselves here.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it's tough. And what it is though, LP, is it's like it's generations upon generations of trauma. You know, because I hear about the mom, you know, like taking the mom's car, like there's a bad relationship with the mom and the son already. So that generation to this generation to this generation, like these cycles have to be broken. You know what I mean? They have to be broken. And that's why we talk to a lot of cycle breakers. That's Stacy's podcast. And so it's time, you know, it's just time to like to break these cycles and change the narrative. There's so many generations of trauma. It's like we just need to redirect and pass on healing instead of trauma. Like that's what I take from that story is there's, you know, victim of victim of victim, and it just keeps going until someone breaks it and does something different.
You know what I thought about in closing is this. Children deserve better. Adults have a responsibility to give them better. And it starts with the adults.
Yeah.
And if you are an adult and you have experienced sexual trauma, you've experienced any trauma that has caused you to take your trauma and then put it onto a child, whether it's your child or somebody else's child. I got 2 words for you. Seek help.
Seek help.
Seek help. We're going to end this podcast, as we always do, with a thank you to all the viewers, all the listeners of the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. Again, if you have been triggered at any point during this podcast and you need immediate help, call 911. That's your starting point. If you don't need immediate help, we have a number of resources that will be listed in the show notes: domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking. We have Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous. We have the new 911 number for suicide issues, which is 988. That's available nationwide here in the States. I'm going to add, some international numbers because we have people that listen to this podcast internationally. So I'll be adding that in the show notes from here on out. Leah Abraham, thank you so much for sticking with me doing this missing persons case. And as always, in closing, I want people to live in awareness. Don't live in fear. Take care of yourself. Make sure if you see something wrong, say something right now.
Yes.
If you see something wrong, say something right now. And with that, for Leah Abraham, LP out.
Thank you, LP.